Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Gerri Berger. Gerri, welcome to the show. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Simon. Me too.
Yeah. So Gerri is a fellow adoptee. She is also an author, and she is a genetic genealogist. Genetic genealogist. So why don't we start with that? Why don't we start with what, because everybody knows what an adoptee is, everybody knows what an author is. Not everybody knows what a genetic genealogist is. So what's a genetic genealogist?
Thank you, Simon. It's a relatively new field. It's come around since the onset of really commercial genetic DNA testing with companies such as Ancestry.com, 23andMe, MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, etc. And genetic genealogy combines both traditional genealogical research methods through available records and also research, analysis, and deduction, being a bit of a detective, using the family trees of one's genetic matches to identify and locate their missing person, whether it be a grandparent, great-grandparent, parent, etc.
Okay. So you were telling me earlier on that you've helped over 300 adoptees get to a successful conclusion in terms of their search, the outcomes they were looking for, something like that. So you've clearly got a huge wealth of knowledge in this area, and listeners, as always, if you are interested in finding out what the guest is on about, there's always in the show notes, always give a bio and links to their websites if they've got one, their books if they've got one, and also their social media. But yeah, over 300 adoptees. It's huge. It's clearly been a labor of love for you, right?
It's a passion. Being an adoptee myself and wondering who I was and where I came from for most of my adult life, and finally learning the truth of my origins is part of what has motivated me to want to help other people do the same.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little, let's dig a little bit deeper into the personal stuff, and then we'll go into the learnings from the perspective that you've got with all these, helping all these other adoptees. And it's fantastic. That's it's kind of mirrors my stuff. So I'm doing it. I've learned some stuff and I want to share it with others. You've learned some stuff, you want to share it with others. We only ever have big people with big hearts on this podcast, right? People don't do it otherwise. So can you tell us a little bit about your own search, just whatever you're comfortable sharing, really?
Sure. I learned I was adopted as early as I could remember, maybe 3 or 4 years old. And I remember actually going to a book fair in the 2nd grade and picking up a book called Are You My Mother? And where this little bird it's a little tiny bird falls from his nest, and he's hopping around town asking a dog and a hen and a bulldozer, "Are you my mother?" Because his mother had taken off before he hatched out of his little egg. And I could really relate to that little bird. And I think ever since then, my search didn't begin in earnest, but I do remember looking at my teachers, my friends' parents, women who would have been around the right age to be my biological mother, looking for resemblances and likenesses, looking for her in the face of strangers. On my 18th birthday, and I had always expressed a curiosity about my origins, and my parents were, really okay with it and understood that it wasn't about wanting other parents. These were just natural questions. Who do I look like? Where do I come from? What do you know about them? As you're growing your own identity and developing. And my mom always told me on my 18th birthday, she would provide me with a copy of my adoption papers, which she did. And when I finally, and it was a private adoption, not an agency adoption. So we had a name. and an approximate location of where she was from based on what the attorney had told my parents. And I remember thinking, well, how hard can this be? Now I know her name and I know where she's from, and I've got a car and a telephone, and I'm going to find her. And I never assumed that she wouldn't want to be found. I mean, I didn't have that perspective at the time. And it was very difficult because, as it turns out, she used an alias, and I searched for her for 24 years. Um, it wasn't until we were reunited through an adoption reunion registry for birth parents and adult adoptees that I found her. And I may never have unless she registered, because she used an alias.
Yeah. Wow. And how's that? How was that? And how's that been? Or, you know, where are you with that?
It's been incredible. You know, it's a never-ending journey of self-discovery, just like anyone else who works on their ancestry chart. You know, the more what begins as a process of playing fill in the blanks um, on a family tree software really morphs into a journey of self-discovery as you learn more about your birth parents and their parents, and way, way back, if that's possible. But w- I first contacted my birth mother 3 days before my 42nd birthday. Um, and it was awesome. I left a message. I was very nervous, and she called me back and said, "You found me, baby. That's me." And we were on the phone for hours and exchanged pictures. And there were so many coincidences of us having stomped the same soil throughout our lives. In fact, when we took a dinner break, she had sent me a picture of her sister on a covered bridge in the town I went to college in.
Wow.
And I had to call her back right away, in New Hampshire of all places. And I said, which is miles from where either of us ever lived at that time. And I said, "That's the covered bridge in Henniker, New Hampshire." And she said, "How on earth would you know that? It's just this little bitty town." And I said, "I went to school there." So, you know, we had a very long honeymoon period of discovering our likenesses, and her teaching me about my ancestry. And another thing that made it special was she told me I had 6 half siblings who have known about me since they were old enough to talk. So not only did I get to reunite with her, but I had marathon phone conversations with 6 of my half siblings on my 42nd birthday. So it's remarkable.
Oh, wow. Incredible. Incredible. Now, I just want to take you a step back, because you said something about that you you never thought that she wouldn't want to be found, something like that. You said
Yeah, it never occurred to me
yeah.
at the time when I was 18 and looking at those papers and seeing her name, that she wouldn't want to be found. It might have, I wasn't, and I think that had more to do with maybe a maturity level of not even considering or anticipating how I might be received. And of course, you know, you know, looking back, maybe later on than that, during my search, there is that fear of rejection, because by sheer virtue of the fact that you were adopted, adoptees are afraid of rejection because they were placed for adoption at birth, and in some regard felt unwanted, perceived the adoption as as a first rejection. And but in 95% of the cases that I've worked on, including my own, and that's not to say this never happens, um, birth mothers are amenable and desirous of contact once they've had time to process that their baby, who's now an adult, would like to meet them, because many of them process that loss, the surrender at the adoption, as a death, and they've reconciled that, and they've come to believe that it's just never going to be possible.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I had that. I had that fear of rejection, um, that was by a second rejection by my birth mother, that was buried very deep. It actually just exploded in a therapy session, about 8 years or so ago, and I'd never been aware that fear, that I had that fear. It was totally, it must have been totally subconscious. So it came as a big surprise when it came, but I kind of, my reaction to that was, I'm not gonna. It was a kind of a macho reaction, like I'm not gonna let that fear stop me. So I restarted my search after that. Unfortunately, she died, but anyway, yeah, it's an
part of
interesting
it for
thing.
me, I think part of it for me, Simon, was, you know yourself very well, even at a young age, and no part of my inner, of my soul, of my heart, for lack of better terms, could ever imagine under any circumstances denying my own child if I were in her shoes. And maybe there might have been a time for some birth parents where they felt the same way, but in many ways, certain things that happen to us in life define who we become and what our spouses and children deem acceptable, and whatnot can affect our choice to meet or not meet a child that was placed for adoption. But I guess while I had the fear as my search progressed, that, as I felt I got closer, because there were many kind of false starts, like, oh, here she is, this must be her, and it's not her. Oh, here's another person by the same, oh, it's not them. So you get your hopes up and then you fall. And sometimes, I mean, over the course of 24 years, you have to take breaks, just for sheer self-preservation, to just put the search down and get on with your own life. And then someone says something, or something comes to mind, or you watch a movie, and then get ready for re-entry. It comes up again. But it did occur to me that rejection was a possibility. And certainly every time I picked up the phone to call someone by that name, I think my heart was in my throat and my hands were shaking. But that having been said, I also knew that if she was anything like me, even if she had to have the conversation privately or not welcome me into her life in terms of my siblings, if I had any, which I do, or her husband, if she was married, which she is, were not okay with it, that she would find a way, because I think you inherit a lot more than how you look. And I guess I believed, or at least was extremely hopeful to the point where I believed that there's no way that if she were living, that she would deny me.
Yeah,
and she didn't. I was lucky.
that's cool.
Yeah.
So I'll take you back a little bit further, because it seems like, as we're kind of roughly same age, I think, and you never ask a lady her name, her age, right?
You can ask my age. I'll be 58 in April.
Oh, okay, right. So
I was born in 1965, and my birth mom was born in the mid 1940s.
Yeah, we're exactly the same age. I'm 57 too. So yeah, you just, I'll be 58 next January gone. Sorry, next January gone. How do you get that? Next January I'll be 58. So it seems to me that your parents, especially, you talked about your mum, she was kind of quite open. She said, okay, well, when you get to 18, you're gonna get the details, and then you can kind of go. That seems to be perhaps a little more. She was a little more at ease about this than the majority of parents of that, adopting parents in that era, I would guess. Would you say? Or
it's hard to say. There were a handful of adoptees that I went to school with in elementary school, junior high, and high school, and we all seem to figure out who each other are very early on, whether or not we become dear friends or not. Those handfuls of people tend to know, because most towns are small towns in their way, and you have friends, and you go over to their house after school, and you get to know their siblings, and so there's this sense of community. And invariably there are the comments, well, you don't look like your parents, or you don't look like your brother. Oh, you're so and so sister, you don't look, you know and well, that's because I'm adopted. And so and word just kind of gets around. Or when you tell a friend you're adopted, they're like, oh, this other person who lives around the block from you is adopted.
Yeah, yeah. There's yeah,
But
I was
to
very
answer, I'm sorry.
sorry. I was very surprised when you said that 95% of birth mums were amenable. I thought, and they're and the first thought that came to my mind really was that's a big number, but also the fact that their amenability changes over time. I would guess, does it? Some of them, because some you talked about birth mothers processing it like death, and the shame from talking to birth mothers, as I have done, the shame that society heaped on them became was so huge that it became a very scary area for them to go anywhere near whatsoever, and that's going to reduce their amenability, right? That because they're going to be actually scared. It's something that's so close to their hearts that they can't bear it. You can't bear that resurfacing again. I mean, how would you? I'm stumbling really. I don't know what the question is, but
regarding the amenability of, I guess you find the high numbers staggering based on what they went through at the time and the stigma associated with it.
yeah.
And I'm fortunate I'm not really sure if I answered your prior question, but basically, I don't really know too much about other adoptees' experiences in that regard, concerning people that I grew up with. I raised some questions occasionally throughout my life, and they knew there was a curiosity, nothing was hidden, and there was nothing emotional really attached to it. And they understood my need to know. They wanted me to be at peace and to have that information. And I think they were curious too, to some regard. But in terms of the amenability of birth parents, an interesting fact here in the US is that some women who surrendered children for adoption in the 1960s were actually the pioneers of the adoption reform movement, which was, a march on Washington for open records. They were pissed off, for lack of a better term, that their mothers made them give up their babies because of the stigma it would put on their family during those times. And they really weren't given a choice. It was fine. If you want to keep the baby, you're on your own. You're not coming back home, etc. So there was no real choice. But they wanted their children to be able to have access to their own original birth records, everything, not just the original birth certificate. The fight was for open records, that any adoptee that comes of age would have access to the adoption petition, the relinquishment papers, the medical info, everything that's in that file. And eventually, in 9 of 50 states, 2 that never sealed records, because here the birth records, original birth certificates, are controlled by the state in which the adoptee is born and adopted. They I just lost my train. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
The
you're talking about the nine states and the open records, and yeah.
Right. The fight was for open records, but what we as adoptees and some birth parents who were pioneers of this movement for the fight for open records, to unseal the records so their children could find them if they wanted to. So I don't know that, I mean, certainly there are those birth parents that don't want contact, that are not amenable, who never were. And predominantly because their parents brainwashed them at a very young age that if you ever tell anyone, even the natural father, about this baby, or the fact that you're pregnant, or the fact that you gave up a child, you'll be damaged goods. No one will ever want to marry you. Your relationships will go down the tubes. You'll basically be ostracized by society. And then when birth mothers had to sign the relinquishment papers, they pretty much had to swear in writing that they promised to in no way ever interfere in the relationship between the child and the adopting family. So many believed, as my own birth mother did, that it was illegal
Right.
for her to even look for me.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that before.
But I think as times changed and these women's parents pass away and they feel more empowered and they may be in the workforce and they have a level of education and more life experience, they're better in a position to make their own dreams come true, and at least to have that closure, to no longer have to wonder, is that child okay? Or God forbid, did something hideous happen like you used to see on some of these TV programs about what happens when children enter the foster system or have abusive adoptive parents, etc.
Yeah. So, what have been the most kind of surprising things that you've learned as you've helped other adoptees find their truth?
Surprising things.
So the listeners for this episode will be adoptees. They might find that statistic, if they're afraid, if they're aware of their fear of rejection, like I became, right, they might be surprised that it's actually 90, and obviously it's a rule of thumb. It's based on the 300 cases that you've worked on and got to a resolution of. But what's the information that adoptees who are perhaps going through this search at the moment, what's the most kind of surprising things that
They might experience?
that they might experience? Yeah, that's a good.
Well, in today's day and age, DNA testing is a game changer. And so whether or not the place in which you live, or I should say, where you were born or adopted, whether or not you are allowed to have access to your own original birth information doesn't necessarily mean, as in my case, just as in my case, that you're going to be able to find that person because they've probably been married at least once, 50, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And they may have used an alias. So I think and also adoptees talk to other adoptees, and by the time adults are ready to search, they've already heard stories from other adoptees and have learned that the information that was provided may not be true. As an example, my adoptive parents were told that both of my birth parents were Jewish because they were Jewish. It wasn't true. My birth mom was a quarter Jewish on her father's side. The ages that they provided were accurate for my birth mother and completely inaccurate for my natural father. So I think one of the things that people find surprising is when they get their DNA results, because today, someone who's searching whether or not they have access to their own original birth information is going to find out online or through the adoption community or whatever means that the way people are making contact with their biological family members is through DNA testing. And that's because, as you know, Simon, some people may not, it's not, when you take a DNA test, you not only receive an admixture chart, which is a fancy name for a breakdown of your ethnic mix, the systems also pair you with your genetic quote unquote matches, your genetic relatives, and deposit them into categories of approximate relationship: parent-child, close family, first cousin, second cousin, third cousin, etc. And so it's almost making a lot of these restrictive laws irrelevant. But one of the big surprises people find is when they look at those DNA results and they see things in their admixture chart that they never expected.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it begins for some before they start, before the search progresses beyond that.
So yeah, before we started recording, I was telling Gerri that my new year started off with an interesting one, which is a conversation with a cousin who I'd met through Ancestry DNA. So somebody, one of the guests on the show recommended doing it, so I did it. And then somebody else told me that if you can take your Ancestry DNA records and you can actually upload them to other sites, so you're not restricted to just the site that you test on. You can use your records on other communities.
May I jump on that for a second?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you'll explain it clearly.
So what you're saying, what you're really saying is that when, well, just to clarify for listeners who are not familiar with DNA testing, when you test with a company such as Ancestry or 23andMe, you have the ability to download what is called your raw DNA data, which are your test results. And there are other sites who accept what is called competitor uploads, meaning on Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, you can actually upload your results from Ancestry or 23andMe or other sites and be paired with people who have tested independently with those sites without submitting a DNA sample to them. But companies like Ancestry and 23andMe do not accept competitor uploads. And so you must test with both of those companies. But it is possible to increase your pool of genetic matches in search of a closer match by doing as you suggested.
Yeah. Okay. So some sites accept competitors' uploads
Results,
and
right?
some results, some don't. I have to say that actually the Ancestry one was the biggest out of, and the other two sites I think were just duplicates. Really, they didn't show me anything that the Ancestry didn't. The Ancestry DNA hadn't done it. But that's one of those things. So, and the way that
I always encourage people. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
I always encourage people to test with Ancestry first. And this is what even volunteers in the search community will suggest. And the reason is because we want to kind of corral adoptees and birth parents into one place so they can find a parent-child match on the first test. That having been said, Ancestry has over 20 million independent DNA testers, whereas the other companies weigh in at anywhere from 2 to 5 million testers. And so the statistical odds of a closer match, and not even a parent-child, but the statistical odds of closer matches are in your favor and make it easier to identify the birth family.
Yeah. So, what are the emotional roller coaster? You referred to this as a lot of false starts when you were doing your search. I guess with DNA, false starts aren't quite as important these days, or not important. They're not quite as common, is it? I mean, what does it look like? What does the landscape look like?
I guess it depends on the searcher and their experience. Sometimes people come to me after, 2 years of having tested, contacted relatives. Hi, my name is so-and-so. I was adopted. Do you know who my birth parent could be? Which I don't recommend doing because sometimes it results in people taking down their tree and closing off contact with you, which is sad, but it happens. But I think the the roller coaster associated with the search could be, sometimes people work with inexperienced volunteers, but they feel so lucky to have someone working on their search for free that they let that person take the ball and run with it. And they could end up identifying the wrong individual and even insisting to the family themselves, no, I know that you're the right person, to the extent that they permanently alienate the adoptee from the family. That can happen. It does happen. And so that creates a roller coaster where someone feels very helpful, or if someone does what they can and then realizes they're really not qualified, they just kind of disappear on them, and then they feel hopeless and helpless. So sometimes the adoptee has gone through a roller coaster searching the DNA route before they come to me. And others, like many, they'll take the test and I don't know what people expect, but they think, wow, if I take a DNA test, I'm going to be able to find them. And then they look at their results, their admixture chart, and their DNA matches, and they see second and third cousins, some of whom have family trees linked to their names, some who don't. And they say, now what? What do I do? How do I make sense of this?
Yeah.
So yeah, but it is very emotionally charged, because we always get our hopes up that at last we're, regardless of even whether or not relationships are possible, it's like, at last I'm finally going to never have to wonder again, which is liberating. And when that doesn't occur, it's a big letdown.
Yeah. Because as human beings, adoptees or non-adoptees, I don't think that we're particularly good at predicting how we're going to feel when things happen.
That's true. That's true. I had a client who pursued me in earnest and wanted to know how soon I could do it and how long it would take. And when I found their birth mom, which is who they were interested in searching for, um, they decided they didn't want contact. They were too fearful. He became emotionally paralyzed. That's not everybody, but sometimes people think they know what they want until it's no longer a dream and it becomes a reality. And then fear kicks in. You're on the adrenaline of the search and the pursuit, and you're going to find it, and you're determined. And then when you have in front of you what you believed you wanted, sometimes, well, then that whole, what if she doesn't want to know me? What if she refuses contact with me? I would be crushed. So I'd rather not pursue this, because I think it would kill me, if she didn't want to know me.
Yeah. Yeah. I can, yeah. I feel that, and tricky, eh? Tricky.
And it is crushing for some. I mean, sometimes there are what's called late discovery adoptees, as you know. We call them LDAs. These are people who have found out after their parents pass, either through records in the family drawer or safe deposit box, that they were adopted and were never told. And some of these folks had the inkling, as teenagers, and even asked the question, and were told, no, no, no. And they go spiraling into therapy, because you can't have an argument with a tombstone. You can't understand why you were lied to and not trusted with your own truth. Um, and it's a hard nut to swallow, and very difficult to process.
Yeah. Yeah. What, see, when people ask me about my birth mum, I say, well, yeah, I found out that she was, she died. And they go, so you didn't get any closure then? And I said, well, I did get closure. I did get closure, and I didn't get the result I was expecting. I didn't get the result that I was desiring of. Nobody would want to find that out. But I had that meltdown in the therapist's chair, restarted my at the prospect of another rejection from my birth mother, and then I restarted the search, and I got my adoption file. I got my adoption file as part of that search, and in people have heard me talk about this, but in that file, there was a letter that made clear to me how much my birth mother loved me, how the teddy bear that I'd seen as some kind of crude consolation prize was a symbol of her love. And that was my closure, because the trauma had surfaced around the teddy bear, and then the resolution of the teddy bear being from her in the letter to the social worker about the teddy bear. That was closure. Now, I could have never expected that.
I think part of that has to do with, as you know, Simon, being adopted. If you share that information in your youth, kids can be cruel. Your own mother didn't want you. Kids can use that information at age 6, 8, 10, 15, 20 to hurt you with that, as if you had any control over it, or as if it were even true. So when you learn, as you did, that she was your mother, and that she did love you, and she wanted to continue to be your mother and care for you and nurture you in the way that mommies nurture their new babies, must have been profoundly moving, because of what we tend to believe by sheer virtue of the fact that we were given up.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel, I am lovable, I am worthy, I didn't fall out of the sky, I am connected to the human condition through people, through this person.
But the healing came from a letter, not from meeting her, and it wasn't
Right.
a letter written to me. So what I'm trying to say, I think, in a roundabout, waffly kind of a way, as sometimes do, is that like, it doesn't all hinge on a happy reunion.
That's true.
It doesn't all hinge on a happy reunion, and you don't know where it's going to go, but you've got to take the next step as feels appropriate to you. Like if as this client, you'll think your client, you talked about him being emotionally paralyzed by this fear of fear. That was I was the opposite of that. But we're all okay. We're all grown-ups. We're all in charge of our own search. We can stop the process and back out of it if it gets too hot, and we can all go back to it. Once we're once we're ready to do that. And there's no we are in control. We weren't in control of being relinquished, but we are in control now. You can do what you want to do.
And I agree that closure or healing does not necessarily come from reunion or meeting your birth parent, or even if, some people have gone through the honeymoon period and have had a permanent falling out after that. But I always encourage people to take pause after we've discovered the truth, to just celebrate the end of a lifelong preoccupation of wonderment, and to just breathe, and let's hope for the best possible outcome when contact is made. But whether or not relationships are possible, discovering the truth of who you are in many ways is profoundly healing. You can't be loved out of your need to know, is something I always say, because that's what's true for me and many of the people that I work with. It's just part of the human condition, and to know who we are and where we come from and who our people are. That said, there are people who don't really feel the need to search, or feel that they would be betraying their adoptive parents to take up a search. And I find that this is way more so true among men, who feel a tremendous sense of loyalty to their adoptive mother and won't even consider beginning a search until she's deceased. And that's oftentimes when they'll find their birth mom may be too, and that it's too late.
Yeah. Well, I felt like that. And when I was going through my search, I didn't tell my mum. So did I feel like I was betraying her? No. Did I want her to know that I was searching? No.
Right. I totally get it.
The two things are completely different.
Mhm.
Does
But
she ever
healing.
does she listen to the podcast? And she's now going to find out that, but she knows I kept it now. Does she know that I kept it secret? Did I keep it secret? Well, yeah, I guess, but you don't have to tell. It was tricky for me actually, because I was brought up very honest and open, and so it felt to an extent. But did I feel like I was betraying when I did the search? No, but I wouldn't rub it in her face. And I was drawing. I said earlier on that your mum was seemed quite enlightened for those days. To be okay with that. She must have been had her own sense of grounding. This is when I talk to adoptive parents, the more aware, the more grounded parents are always the ones that say to me, actually, Simon, my relationship with my kids begins with me. It's about me overcoming my own trauma, my own demons, and if I become a better person, I become a better parent. And it's great to hear that from them. I had an email this morning from a middle schooler in New Mexico doing a project. She's about adoption, and she said, well, what do you think? You're an expert. I said, well, I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert as in I'm not a shrink, but I'm an expert from my own experience. If that's what's interested, if that qualifies. But I also believe that I listen to the adoptive parents, and how together they are. How she said, what changes would you recommend? And I'd say, well, they need to be a little bit clearer of their own trauma before they adopt themselves. That's because if they're in a better place, they're going to create a better space for their kids growing up. Any relationship starts with us, and this whole thing about trying to fix my kid. Well, look in the mirror first, right? Fix yourself, and then you'll be in a better place to raise your kid. So anyway,
One of the things about adoptees that's just a truth that's hard for us kind of being in the middle is we have the mother who gave birth to us and the mother who raised us. We have two mothers. And some people argue that mother means the person who gave birth to you only. And others will argue it's a relationship. It's the person who raised you. And it's both. And, here I am pushing 60 years old and have a 24-year search for my birth mother behind me, and a 10-year search for my natural father after that behind me. I mean, these impossible searches in many ways became the school in which I was able to help others. So I realize their purpose now. You think the universe is punishing you that you can't find the answer you've been searching for when so many other people can. And now I look back and I see the reason, if you want to put it that way. But I think that I would have to agree with you that the better place the parent is in, the easier it is for them to really be there and understand what they need for their child, and put their own emotions around that aside to the extent that they can close that hole in that child's heart that exists because of the not knowing, like missing the first 10 minutes of the movie of their lives.
Yeah. And I think for us as adoptees, it's grace with our birth parents and grace with our adoptive parents, like being, they were always doing the best that they could. Like people these days, it's trauma all the way, isn't it? Like
and we wouldn't be who we are without both sets of parents.
Yeah. We wouldn't. And this, that we're judging yeah, so in the adoption agencies, most adoption agencies are run by adoptive moms, you know, like from my experience. So that they are, and they're running, they are, because it's become so shrinkified. There's so many, because the shrinks are the heroes in, you know, they're the all-knowing sages in the adoption industry. I think the adoption industry has become obsessed with trauma, and I feel that a lot of adult adoptees are obsessed with trauma as well. And I think that we should be trauma informed and healing obsessed. I don't see a lot of people out there being healing obsessed. Everybody's
because
saying
they get addicted to the peptides of depression and anxiety and fear and misery, and people can get stuck. And that pain, if they don't have their own information, it's kind of like that pain, at least it's theirs, and they know it, and they nurse it, and they nurture it, and they talk about it on social media. I remember going into a Facebook group for adoptees a couple of years ago when we were circulating a petition for original birth certificates, and someone the administrator threw me out of the group and said, "You're trying to be a politician in our crying room." And I took a look at the timeline, and it was all people who were giving each other virtual hugs for all their unhappiness, and yet no one wanted to do anything proactive. It's like, well, if you took a DNA test, well, I don't have the money. Well, if you went on care.com and became a babysitter in 2 sessions, you could have the money. Well, blah, 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 blah. There's always some reason to stay stuck in the pain because it's comfortable and it's familiar, and you don't have to face the fears of, what if I find what I'm looking for?
Powerful, powerful. I was thinking that the other reason for giving the parents grace is because this trauma stuff that is commonplace these days, nobody knew about that in the 60s. So they could only do that. They could only, like, I sometimes I hold up my my mum's the adoption education that my mum and dad were given. It's an A4 piece of paper folded in half. Right? It's an A4 piece of paper folded in half. It's approximately 700 words. 700 words. That was the adoption education that they were given.
Wow.
So this is 1967 I'm talking about, right? So, like, can we give them some grace, because they didn't have all the books. They didn't have the knowledge wasn't there for them to be,
that's true,
trained in, you know.
there was no expectation when then, you know, back then it was believed that this infant is a blank slate with no ancestry, no birth parents, and whether or not you tell them they were adopted, which in the 60s it was suggested by family psychologists that you do, that through various stories and whatnot, that so the child could understand that that one day that child would grow up and want to search for their roots.
Yeah.
And some parents feel, some adoptive parents feel offended by that. When other family members, extended family members, learn of your search, if you share it with them, a lot of them will shame you, as I talk about in my book, the shamers. You know, why do you want to find that? Not even them, that. Why do you want to find that? Weren't your parents good to you? Didn't you have this and that? Weren't you loved? Didn't you have a privilege or this or that? And that's what I mean by no one can love you out of your need to know. And some people allow others to shame them out of their need to know. I have people who contact me who say, you know, hi, I'm adopted. I did a DNA test. I need your help. But I just want the medical information. And I say, you don't have to do that with me. I get it. I'm an adoptee. Because what we used to do is tell the shamers, oh, well, I'm interested in the medical information. Oh, okay. Now you're okay and you're not the ungrateful adoptee. So you're somehow more acceptable in the eyes of others or people who know your parents or members of your family if you hide what I call, quote unquote, hiding behind the medical. Of course, especially in this day and age, that's very important, especially since they're curing terminal illnesses with stem cell transplants, etc. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So have it's been I've loved the conversation, and I love what you said it twice now, but you just said it again. No one can love you out of the need to know. I love that. So I would encourage you listeners, if you're interested in this, check out the show notes, check out Gerri's book, and let's get ourselves better educated about this stuff. And that little throwaway line about the what you said about people hiding behind the medical. And there's Gerri's
most people want the hug, they want the reunion, they want to see who they look like, human beings have a need to feel that they belong, not that they don't feel they belong in their adoptive family, but it is a basic human need to know who you are and where you come from, I think.
Is there anything that you'd like to share that I've not asked you a question about?
I loved what you said about healing, and I love the name of your business, Thriving Adoptees. And when I think of that, I think of, for me, it's, in many ways, people who have processed and reconciled their adoption experience, search and reunion, whatever it means for them, that they're in a place where they're in a good place. They love where they are in their lives. They've accomplished what it is they want to accomplish, or know what it is they've always wanted to know, and they're at peace. However it is, whether they search or not, or are reunited or not, that they're in a good place. And I really think that the service that you provide to really the global adoption community with your podcast is extremely valuable, because healing means so many things to different people.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think we should be healing obsessed, right? I think that's what we should be looking
I like that.
I have a little grumble. I've mentioned it a couple of times on podcasts, but I'm going to have I haven't shared it with you, but I read you heard of this guy, Bruce Perry, is a trauma guru. He's an American guy called Bruce Perry. And he's written a book with Oprah, and it's basically just a long advert for him, and it's got a very simple message, which is it's it's not your fault, it's what happened to you. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just what happened to you. So it's not solely about adoption, but yeah. But he keeps on saying trauma. But the brain is but we've got neuroplastic brains, and then
right,
neuroplasticity.
So right.
There's reason to be hope, and then
we can form new connections.
Oh yes, but then he goes back into the trauma, and then he comes back and says yes, but we have neuroplasticity, and I'm just thinking, well, how, mate? What do you do? You've written this book. You've got Oprah on board. You've been working with Oprah, but where are we? How are we going to be healed? Don't just dangle a little carrot called hope. Tell me what it's about. Tell me what healing is about. Explain to me. Have you heard this thing that there's no actual scientific proof that the primal wound exists? Have you heard that? There's no scientific proof that the primal wound exists.
Well, they'll say there's no scientific proof that a man was curing brain cancer with peptide pills, Dr. Stan Brzezinski, and the courts wanted to, he was brought in front of a grand jury like 8 times, and his patients whose lives he saved 20 years later are marching on the courthouse, and yet people will stand there and say, unless there was a clinical trial, there's no proof. And people are standing up, there's proof, there's me, I'm 25, I was 4 years old when I had an inoperable brain tumor the size of a golf ball in the middle of my head. Well, there's no proof. Of course there's proof.
It's a weird world. It's a weird world.
But on the other hand, I remember reading Nancy Verrier's Primal Wound in the 80s, and I could see more so the trauma of a birth parent who's conscious and 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. And of course, I have no recollection of being in the womb, and I was fortunate. I was held and loved and treated like a natural child of her parents. And so I really couldn't relate. But as I got older and I embarked on my search, I saw more truth of what was in that and how it had impacted me, my psyche, my life, my sense of self. And in many ways, Search and Reunion is what healed me. Because, we live here, Simon, in a system. I was a New York adoptee. And until January of 2020, years after I found my birth mom, I finally got a copy of my original birth record, which had the same alias on it as my adoption papers. But at least, just like every other American citizen, I was finally allowed to have it. I wasn't discriminated against by a second-class citizen by sheer virtue of the fact that my parents weren't married at the time I was born, that I wasn't born within the construct of marriage. And so, but going back to the trauma and primal wound, I think that there are some people who really take that overboard and, write and post poems on social media about how they remember being born and they felt their mother's trauma. And it's like, you're an infant. None of us have access to pre-verbal memory. This is nonsense. And then in other ways, you yourself, the more evolved you are and the more familiar you are with the issues, can see the truth in what's being put forth and how it shaped who you became.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
I took the primal wound to heart. I thought this explains everything. And then I realized that maybe I was wrong. And I'm not going to try and answer, I'm not going to try and sum up why I think I was wrong, because it's a big question. And
well, it's a journey and a book that every adoptee should definitely read to see, it's like anything else, eat the meat and spit out the bones, see what resonates with you and hold that,
Okay. So if you're going to read it, listeners, if you haven't read it already, then yeah, maybe see if it fits for you and read it. But and then once you've read it, then watch the video that's going to be in the links. So the video, I did a webinar a month or so ago, and it's called Whole: Healing My Primal Wound, and I go in depth on this for like an hour and a quarter on what the primal wound is, and what I believe, and I don't have the audience or the credibility of Nancy Verrier. This is just my personal experience on my view on the primal wound and what I believe is a more accurate metaphor to differentiate trauma from who we are.
And you also, harking back to the scientific proof, I mean, certainly there's scientific proof that emotions and chemical changes in the body through cortisol, fear, stress, all of those things are transferred to the child while the child is in utero. So I think that there is some scientific aspects of that.
Yeah, I think
that there are.
The stuff that I saw was a guy was actually is there scientific proof of the primal wound? rather than is the scientific proof that the birth, the what's going on for the mother is transferred to the child. I think they're two slightly different things. There's a guy from, well, not too far away from you, up in New England, Harvard, a Harvard medical professor, or children's pediatrics guy. I can't remember the chap's name, but he was the one that said there's no scientific proof, and it does kind of link into what you said about clinical trials and what constitutes scientific proof, because it's a complicated thing and
everyone's got an opinion, and a degree from an Ivy League school doesn't necessarily make the opinion correct for everyone.
It doesn't. And when I think about doctors, I often think about what doctors were doing in the 60s when we were born. They were promoting smoking. They were paid by the tobacco companies to promote smoking. So, you know, science moves on, and opinions and evidence change would become. I think we've become fixated with science. And
well, it's like they say the earth was flat until it was round. Indeed. And how many people lost their head for suggesting it was round before it was generally accepted? Because there was a time when if you conflicted with the king, you know, or what have you.
Apparently, it took they reckon it took 2,000 years for that. Was it 200 years? From 200 years for the general consensus to change about flat Earth. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah,
200 years. And there's still flat earthers out there, right?
Oh yeah, there are.
Yeah, fascinating, Gerri. Fascinating. Thank you, listeners. Check out what Gerri's doing. The great book, and she knows, as you know now, because you've been listening for an hour and so, she knows her onions. So reach out to her. Thanks a lot, listeners. Thank you, Gerri.
Thank you, Simon.